There is evidence that Congress member Jim Jordan literally led a phone call on January 2nd, 2021, days prior to January 6th, right? In order to literally strategize and mobilize how to send people to the Capitol to delay or stop the certification. If anyone counts under Amendment 14, Section 3, it is Congress member Jim Jordan, yet he is a Congress member. What does that tell us? That the Constitution is optional. And we have this illusion that it's not. When you violate a contract that produces a political solution, right? Because it is a political violation. It doesn't require a criminal prosecution because it is a political crime. The reality that no branches want to actually execute on that, and there has to be a certain branch in order to make it self-executing, is fucking stupid, and it's only because of former Chief Justice Solomon Chase, who said that basically they couldn't make it self-executing because it would be unjust against the South. Why? Because Confederates couldn't run for government. And that's saying that a judge position that if the Constitution says that 2 plus 2 is 4. No, I can say 2 plus 2 is 5, which is against what Federalist 78 through 83 positions, which is that they are the weakest branch. And in fact, they cannot have a political role, which means that they cannot go against the Constitution. Why? Because in order to literally change the Constitution, Congress or the people through a constitutional convention have to make an amendment. And this is the thing. If Congress has the authority in order to invoke any response on the federalization of, say, the National Guard against civil unrest, and there is legislation that circumvents that for the president, which one is much more superior? If the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, if that's the Constitution. That's what Federalist Papers guides us. That's how it's supposed to be. That's the whole point of a Constitution, that it's supreme. It's not optional. If anyone should be arrested, if anyone should be arrested by the military, by our agencies, it should be 1, Congress member Jim Jordan, and 2, Donald Trump. Donald Trump, because he led the insurrection. He led the insurrection. He's saying that Los Angeles was an insurrection. And the fact is that Los Angeles is a what? A response to an executive order. If breaking in the Constitution, so unconstitutional, is more severe than unlawful, so January 6th, that was what? A wanting to circumvent and stop the certification process, which is a constitutional process. This means that Jim Jordan was breaking the Constitution, so his oath as a Congress member, and Donald Trump broke his Constitution. Donald Trump broke his constitutional oath, Article 2, on January 6th, through that inaction. You see, he was quick to respond to Los Angeles, but not quick to respond to DC. He's quick to pardon January 6ers, right? But of course, he's going to maximize on the utilization of all agencies, including the Marines, against Los Angeles. What does this tell us? Donald Trump is a fucking criminal. He's a criminal. The January 6th committee report, which again, if you negate that, you're negating the Constitution. The Constitution gives Congress that power, okay? They found 8 literal plans in order to stop the certification. Some of them were unlawful, some of them were unconstitutional, and some of them were both. It was literally plans to stay in power no matter the outcome, right? He premeditated his loss response. There is criminal evidence of criminal intention against the Constitution. The only thing that separates it from something that is successful is that it failed. Unconstitutional requires political remedy. That is Amendment 14, Section 3. So that would be Jim Jordan not being in Congress, yet he is, which tells us what? The Constitution is optional. Illegal requires criminal remedy, right? And that's why we don't require a criminal prosecution for Amendment 14, Section 3, because the Constitution is above that of legislation, above that of law, above that of U.S. law. The Constitution can't change U.S. law. U.S. law cannot change the Constitution. Only the Amendment 5 can change the Constitution. Only the Constitution can change itself. Again, the difference is that January 6th, that was a constitutional process. Los Angeles is an executive order. If the Constitution is supreme, as it should be, people just think that that's the federal government above the state government. That's only within a constitutional legitimacy. But these breaches of the Congress members and also of Donald Trump is what dissolves and erodes away the legitimacy of the Constitution. January 6th was a public training for what is happening today, right? It compromised the Congress. It literally pushed for the Senate to not impeach him. It created the judicial wanting to advance his own agenda. The certification did not occur until January 7, not because there was actual questions as to the results, right? But because there was an insurrection. Because someone, Donald Trump, looked at the protesters, looked at all the people he brought over to the Capitol, and told them, if you don't fight like hell, you won't have a country anymore. He pointed to the Capitol, and they went. That is using your role as commander-in-chief to manipulate the people, manipulate your supporters to do your bidding. That is ineffectively invoking the Second Amendment in order to attack the Congress, in order to attack the Constitution. A president does not have that authority. Illegal is usually involving crimes. Unconstitutional is involving those breaches of the political contract. Once Trump returned to the White House, he was informed almost immediately that violence and lawlessness had broken out at the Capitol amongst his supporters. At 2:24 p.m., President Trump applied yet further pressure to Pence, posting a tweet accusing Vice President Mike Pence of cowardice for not using his role as president of the Senate to change the outcome of the election. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify correct set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones, which they are asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. Now, here's the thing. In allowing for an insurrectionist to win a presidency, what does that create? There are states who want to teach that the 2020 election was stolen. Now, saying, yeah, what's the difference between what's happening now with the question of the election in 2020? Well, 2020, 2021, there was already litigation that found that there's no evidence. Now here, people are questioning, but they're still uncovering whether there's evidence. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security, there is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. That tells us that what they're doing is reshaping history, reshaping the narrative. Why? Because Democrats, Congress members refuse to challenge the certification because they're lawmakers, not the court, so they cannot vote on what? On the Constitution? That's questionable. But however, what that also was a contribution to was our former president, Joe Biden, dropping the election interference clause because you said that the DOJ did it without Biden. Now you're realizing that they have a lot of influence into their decisions. You were gullible and believed that they were just independent. History and documentation tells us that they're not. Now, sure, depending on the president, usually within our republic that is legitimate, they pick and choose who to influence. Usually it's the Department of State. Usually it's the Department of Defense. But in this reality with DT, we're seeing him compromise all fucking federal agencies. They're all his militia now, including our military. They're serving a king. You know, the army is saying that June 14 is for the U.S. Army. No, it's not. It's for DT. They know it very well, too. Here are some of the things that Jim Jordan can qualify for. Obstruction of an official proceeding. Conspiracy to defraud the United States. Conspiracy to make a false statement. Incite, assist, or aid in comfort in the insurrection. He obstructed the literal certification, which is a constitutional process, right? Which is much more severe than unlawful. The Constitution is literally every American's insurance policy, and without it, it's meaningless, which is why he's capable of just seeing what part of the Constitution is actually binding or not. And what is that dependent on? The courts. The same Supreme Court that he stopped. January 6th would only be a riot if it was done on any other day where there wasn't a certification process. The fact they had a certification process meant that there was a goal. That goal was to delay or stop a certification, right? In our reality, that is a severe breach, and that's not an authority a president has. Lawsuits, electors, states overturn votes, Congress overturn votes, Pence overturns votes, DOJ interference, military seizes voting machines, sabotages January 6th. That was the goal. And military seizing, we see that in Los Angeles.